Serious, medics of Reddit, what is the weirdest that's not a real thing reason a patient has come to see you? My dad's a doctor, and when you are the child of a doctor there are many moments like that in your life. Mostly where you're on the receiving end of the phrase. But when my dad was still doing his home clinic, he had several patients with the weirdest symptoms. Once a man came in and said he had a burning penis and actually thought someone was coming in and lighting a fire under it while he slept. He wanted a cure for burning when in reality he had gonorrhea. He got offended when my dad told him this because he was married and his wife was fine, but 80% of women that have gonorrhea are asymptomatic. Turns out the dude had a serious cheap prostitutes addiction, which is where he and his wife got it from. I had a patient come in for a general surgeon's consult and was convinced that she had a blood cancer, which is non-surgical BTW. I asked her, "Okay, have you had, insert all probing questions here?" She says no. Okay. So I asked how she was so confident in having the blood cancer, and she says that she read about this test you can do on the internet, where you get about this much, while approximating like half a cup, rum and drink it. And if it makes your lymph node hurt, then you have the cancer. And then she points to 2 spots where there definitely aren't major lymph nodes and says that's where she felt it. I said okay, well keep that in mind and check your labs in case. So I finished my interview and walked out. I checked her labs from a month ago and they were perfect. No one told me how solid your poker face would need to be when I started medical school. Thank goodness for masks. Gynecologist here. A woman came to the ER because she claimed her uterus had wandered off inside her body. She was sobbing hysterically and seemed genuinely afraid. I called my backup senior consultant, who immediately said that he'd met the patient before and that he would handle it. He walks in, examines her, wriggles his hand in her vagina and then tells her the uterus is now firmly back in place. The woman now cries of happiness and thanks him profusely before happily being on her way. Story from my dad, who is a paramedic. In the medical world, there are those kinds of people who think they have every problem, condition, sensitivity under the sun. When meeting one of these people, my dad decided to test how far this guy can go faking symptoms. He started asking the man pretty normal problems like diabetes, heart complications, IBS. Then in a feat of genius, my genius dad asks if he's had any problems with his vaginal gland. To anyone not familiar with that term, that is a made-up body part found in the fairies in beloved children's show Fairly Odd Parents. My dad got this guy to admit he had issues with a made-up body part for cartoon fairies. The best part is that as a paramedic, he has to write what is called a run report for every call they respond to, basically explaining what happened to the patient. What was done shitty like that? My dad had to look up on Nickelodeon's website how to properly spell vaginal gland to put on an actual run report. Edit. Typos. A woman wanted to get checked for rabies because a possum, which does not carry the rabies virus, attacked her chicken and she wanted to get checked. She did not get scratched or bit by the possum either. She wanted to get checked regardless. Saw a patient once who stated she caught diabetes from her best friend after sharing clothing. Yes, diabetes is a real thing, but catching it from your friend's sweater is not a real thing. A certain doctor was visited by a mother and a 16-year-old child requesting for medical leave because the child felt something went into his right eye, and he rubbed it so much that he could not open his eyes. So he went back to sleep. Mother thinks he had an eye infection or something. Upon further questioning, apparently at 8 AM that day, the child had a final year examinations that day. His eyes were normal. Medical leave was not granted. I'm a physiotherapist and probably once a day get someone telling me that their disc popped out and needs to be put back in again. Man. People that say stuff like that is why it took so long for my connective tissue disorder to be recognized. I had to physically slide my hips and shoulders out of socket in front of so many doctors and explain that they've been that way my whole life but are now causing crippling pain. Finally a rheumatologist was like, "Oh, I bet you have condition," and asked a load of questions. I'm a veterinary student. And we had a lady bring her dog to internal medicine because she was convinced he had echinococosis. Google if you like weird, gross parasites. Apparently she had contacted it once upon a time, unknown if true. And she was convinced her dog had it despite the fact that the dog had never been in an area with endemic echinococcus. And she had it several years before getting the dog. She was dead set on the most extensive diagnostic workup possible. Usually it's harder to convince people to pay the couple $1,000 for a CT. And here's this lady demanding basically an elective one. The dog was not sick. And CT did not find any hydatid cysts. Still have no idea why she chose that moment in her and her dog's lives to suddenly believe to her core that he had it. My friend is a vet and one day this very worried lady comes with a puppy in a box and an egg. She whispers to my friend that she has a female duck. And that her puppy had been messing around with this duck. So she was worried that the egg the duck had laid that morning was some kind of abomination like the basilisk or some other folklore monster. Friend had to bite down laughter and explain that eggs are not laid as a result of sexual intercourse and that her duck's egg wasn't fertilized. The lady gave the puppy away eventually, unconvinced that there was no possibility of creating a dog-duck freak. Not exactly sure if this fits, but it does fall in line with people not understanding medicine. I'm not a doctor, but my sister is. And we are both very unfortunate to have swamp people as family. They are not very bright. Well, about 4 years ago my father was fighting cancer and losing the battle. One of my aunts flew into the metropolitan I live in. And later that evening around the dinner table she asked where my father's girlfriend was. I informed her that she had died of cancer a year previous. Her reaction was some over-the-top anger, yelling and cussing about how terrible it is that his girlfriend gave him her cancer. I actually had to get my sister to drive 40 minutes to my house and explain to her that cancer is not transmitted from person to person. And it was in fact my father's 42 years of chain smoking that gave him cancer. It took quite some convincing. I work in rural EMS. Shift changes at 8 AM. This call came in at 7 AM. Mind you, a call for us can last as long as 5 hours depending on which hospital we are heading to. The call comes in as uncontrolled vomiting. My partner and I immediately head to the address. It took us a while to find the house because we had a house description. But the house was behind a tree line that was behind a locked gate. Anyways, we grab our pack and monitor, climb the gate, only to be met by our patient who was driving herself to the gate. She climbs out of her truck, limbos under the gate and crawls into the back of the ambulance. I asked her when was the last time you threw up? Last night before bed, she said. She claimed to have eaten bad Mexican food and believed that was the cause. She was totally stable the entire time. It ended up being about a 3-hour call. I was so pissed. Patient called 911 for an allergic reaction. This triggers a lights and sirens response from the ambulance. We walk in and it's a little old lady dressed in her winter coat just finishing putting on her lipstick. Not really what you expect to see. She explains to me and my partner that she had terrible nightmares and that's clearly a sign that she's allergic to Lasix. It's not. But she called 911 so we go through the motions and put her on the monitor. A fib. And she's got no HX and is on no meds. We took her in. Not lights and sirens. And gave report. Found out later that she told all the docs that she was in for allergy to Lasix resulting in nightmares. I had a lady come in convinced she had hypothermia because she kept checking her temperature orally immediately on waking and it was always 92 degrees. She thought it was getting low while she slept and causing her snoring, daytime sleepiness, etc. I explained that since she is snoring and sleeping with her mouth open, an oral temperature immediately on waking wouldn't be accurate and a temperature of 92 degrees wouldn't be compatible with life. She wanted continuous temperature monitoring while sleeping. Yeah, that isn't a thing. Even in a sleep study. I discussed with her that she probably has sleep apnea and that she doesn't need to check her temperature unless she is having chills, sweats, other symptoms of infection. She got mad and left. SMH. Haha, a woman brought a small child for an examination. She says that her child has been breathing hard for days and that she hears noise. I must also mention that she came to the emergency room. I took a small pig figurine out of her nose. My nephew had a piece of moldy bread stuck in his nose for 9 months as a toddler. All we knew was he just had terrible breath constantly. They kept checking him for diabetes and all kinds of random things. Sister was brushing his teeth constantly and having him use mouthwash at like 2. Finally a doc looked up his nose and pulled this disgusting rotting mess out. Round of antibiotics and he was good. I once got a 3 AM 911 call to a sick person. Wonderful dispatching. I get there and this dude has a pimple on his back. Not a boil. A pimple. He was insistent that we take him to the hospital. Turns out that he wanted to go because the voices told him that he would get blood poisoning and die if he didn't go. Molecular genetics. We see people who come in because they took a whole exome test from one of the commercial providers, which supposedly identified a serious novel mutation in an obscure gene which they think might be associated with whatever medical problem they have. We do a targeted sequence of that variant's location and 99% of the time find nothing. False positive caused by the commercial lab's low depth testing, combined with a highly automatic reporting system, and how they don't manually review or confirm variants via targeted sequencing. The lesson here is don't make clinical decisions based only on the findings of uncertified exome tests. Former volunteer for the Saxon Disaster Prevention Service. We were once overlooking a race and a guy came to us claiming that he got spontaneous diabetes from eating too many Snickers. Turned out he just had too much and got a stomach ache. My most recent, woman is convinced that the tickle in her throat is throat cancer. She has no other symptoms of cancer that at the stage of causing a tickle would be evident, i.e. swallowing difficulty, voice changes, weight loss. Anyway, she calls us in hysterics that she needed to be scoped immediately because she was going to die. I talked her down, I thought, but told her what to watch for, difficulty swallowing, etc., and if she experienced them, to go to Emerge so she could get imaging sooner than her CT scan. Booked 7 months away. She went to her that night. Got the CT. Found nothing. She was enraged and started sling negligence around. Got scoped 2 days later. Turns out she has a clump of gastric cells in her throat that produce acid causing the tickle. Not in the field. And IDK if it fits. Read a story somewhere that this guy would go fishing with maggots and put a few in his urethra. He ended up in the hospital because he couldn't urinate. Nurse asked why, he responded that he liked the feeling. I'm missing a lot of it, but something along the lines he had many in his bladder and was why he couldn't go to the bathroom. Army medic working in an aid station. Guy comes in with a nosebleed. Says it keeps happening and doesn't stop. Of course we tell him to just chill and hold some tissue to it while write up his paperwork. Then this dude's SGT comes in. He's pissed. Why aren't we helping his dying soldier? Why aren't we freaking out like him? He repeated tells us, medics, that he knows nosebleeds mean brain tumors or cancer. No shit, that's what he said. Angrily. Also, nosebleeder wouldn't stop snorting the gross blood clot and spitting it out, so it wouldn't stop bleeding. Neither one of them listened to a word we told them, but eventually we just said FCK it. He ain't gon' die. So we sent them away while his SGT grumbled about our laziness. It's like he wanted us to pop smoke and have a Black Hawk take him away. A guy said every time he throws up a 20p coin comes out. Hell. I'm no doctor, but I can probably diagnose that one. Guy goes down to the bar, gets trashed, and decides swallowing coins makes for a good bar bet stunt. Guy wakes up with a nasty hangover and having forgotten about his antics, goes to throw up, and presto. Pseudo seizures. People who are medically diagnosed with having fake seizures. They pretend to have full body seizures including convulsions, frothing at the mouth, the works. When I ask them to do things like stand up to get on the stretcher, or hold their arm still so I can start an IV, they comply, while still having a seizure. Double quote. Watching a 47-year-old housewife in a gated golf course neighborhood seizure while standing up and get on a cot is something else. Medic student here. First night shift on placement. Got called for a 19-year-old F who had been drinking too much. We get to the scene to this woman yelling at her BF. Telling him to go FCK himself and not to talk to her. She basically bolts to the ambulance crying when we ask her if she wants to come with us. She said she needed a safe space away from her BF and out of the house. So at first we are thinking this is some sort of domestic dispute. Nope. Turns out after getting drunk at her BF's house party, she had cheated on her BF with his best friend and he had caught them, or something along those lines. She was behind hysterical, so someone called us. During the ride to the hospital this woman was just inconsolable, wailing and kept saying stuff like I am just a SLT like my mom. I just look at the medic and we are looking at each other like did she just say that? I couldn't believe this kinda shit happens in real life and we got called to basically console and transport a drunk 19-year-old. Felt bad for the BF. I'm not. But my dad was. And one time, they had a person on drugs run up to the station in the middle of the night, saying that he, who was naked, was a she, and a snake was dangling from her legs. Speaking as a trans person myself, regardless of mental illness, it seems a little callous to call someone who refers to themselves with she pronouns a he. Have had multiple patients stating that they are allergic to adrenaline, epinephrine. The thing is, adrenaline is a hormone every one of us produces ourselves. So being allergic to adrenaline would basically mean that you couldn't survive through childhood. Adrenaline is also the first-line drug used to treat anaphylaxia, severe allergic reaction. Adrenaline causes your heart rate to increase, raises blood pressure and can make you feel a bit funny for a short period of time, so yeah. You probably could mix that with allergic reaction. But is by no means dangerous unless you have, for example, a severe heart condition or if you inject it to the distal parts of your body, fingers, toes, earlobes etc. Same goes with hydrocortisone. People claim that they're allergic to it. But it also is a hormone we produce, cortisol, and used to treat, for example, severe allergic reactions and inflammation. Edit. Nurse, anesthetist and paramedic here. My mother-in-law is partially deaf, so will sometimes hear something wrong and then mispronounce it. The most infamous is a hiena hernia. She doesn't even have a hernia, but does have diabetes and somehow thought it was part of her symptoms. It's become part of family lore, and so anytime her diabetes is acting up, it's the damn hiena hernia. Her doctor was equally baffled when she brought it up and in the end just rolled with it. Have some medical training and am notorious for providing potential diagnoses to friends who have new symptoms plus pre-existing conditions and want to have suggestions for the doctor so the docs don't write it off as the pre-existing conditions. I had a friend tell me say I'm addicted to the smell of my own skin, ask me if it was a symptom of their mental health disorder or a new disorder they should go get checked out for. I repeatedly told them it's not a thing. They kept whining. I went to their house, smelled their soap. It smelled fantastic. I secretly replaced the soap in the bottles with one the same color. Friend shut up about the skin smelling addiction. The friend literally just liked the smell of soap. I'm a nurse and did telephone triage for a while. Once had a guy call in who was gravely concerned that he had sepsis. I asked what his symptoms were. He said he had none. I asked why he thought he had sepsis. He said he heard on NPR that picking your nose can cause sepsis and wanted to be tested. Double quote. For those who don't know, sepsis is an infection that spreads to your blood and generally affects several organ systems. It's deadly. If you have sepsis, you will feel like you're dying. He felt fine. So I tried to explain this. We went back and forth for several minutes. He insisted that he had dormant sepsis without symptoms. This is 100% not possible. I ended up suggesting he make an appointment with his doctor just because the conversation was going nowhere. In elementary school one day, the principal said during the announcements that a kid at our school had cancer and stressed that it was not contagious and there would be zero tolerance for bullying. At the time I thought it was weird that he had to stress it wasn't contagious, but then the next year a kid asked if my allergies were contagious.